It's destroying interpersonal relationships. It's creating conflict in their life, maybe personally or professionally. And it's creating maybe other types of excess. Now they're returning back to alcohol.
Welcome to Syncreate. This is a show where we're exploring the intersections between psychology, spirituality, and creativity. And we view creativity very broadly. One of our primary goals is to demystify the creative process and kind of expand what it means to be creative. So I'm Melinda Rothaus, and I help individuals and organizations bring their creative visions and dreams to life. And coming to you today from Mystic Oaks in Wimberley, Texas. It's my creative studio space and retreat space in the Texas Hill Country. So, very excited to be recording from this location today. And my guest today is Dr. Diana Rivera, based in Los Angeles. She's a clinical psychologist and creativity coach. She's the owner of Empowerment Psychology. And we did our PhD program together at Saybrook University. We were in the same cohort, which was how we connected. And I'll say a little bit more about that. You also did your undergraduate work at UC Santa Cruz in American Studies and Theater Arts. And you have a master's also in psychology with a specialization in creativity studies. So you've worked for many years as a facilitator in performing arts education, offering professional development coaching to artists, youth, educators, and corporate America. So there's a broad array of kind of contexts that you've worked in. Want to hear more about that in the conversation. And, just want to say, again, we were in the same program and, we connected really deeply at that time and became great friends, collaborators. And, you really, I feel for me, were an incredible accountability partner. And that's something we talk about a lot in Syncreate is the importance of having accountability partners in our creative work. And I really felt like, you helped me get through the program. So I'm always grateful for that and always grateful for our conversations. So just delighted to have you here today. And so I want to kind of begin the conversation around the topic of imagination, which was the topic for your dissertation research. And you were working with creative professionals in the Los Angeles area. And I'm curious, how you think about and define imagination. So for me, when I think about imagination, I feel like it's the kind of first step in the creative process. So when we engage in creativity, whatever medium it is, first we have to be able to imagine and envision the thing that we want to do or that we want to bring to life, and then we can begin to manifest it. So I'm curious, how do you think about imagination and what came up from your research around imagination and creative identity?
Well, first off, I want to say thank you so much for having me on this show. I love what you're
Yes.
doing, and I'm so very honored to be here. I love being connected with imagination on this topic, but just in general, I love being in the same topic as imagination. It's a meaningful place for me. It's something I've been into, obsessed over, thinking a lot about since my childhood, and having a very strong
Yeah.
imagination myself, or imaginative world, or worlds that I would go to. I will say that your definition of imagination is actually not far off from the way I would describe it to people and artists who I may be working with, or, in a sort of layperson's sense of, what is imagination. It's almost like the first door you enter into in the creative process before it manifests, as you
Yeah.
say, into a more full-fledged process or product. In my research, because I wanted to take this interest of mine to the next level, I was able to interview multiple artists. And this, again, for people who are listening, when I say for my research, I'm referring to my doctoral research. So you can't become a doctor without this dissertation.
Yes.
Most people may know that, but other people may, just to clarify. And so in this, I really wanted to study the imaginative lives of of creative professionals, and to see how they were discussing things and exploring it, and what they felt and thought, and how they understood it effectively, and many other things. It was quite formalized. But I would say that coming from the results of my study and integrating it into my life now, I see imagination as an experience. And it is an experience of human consciousness. In
Mm-hmm.
experience, because imagination is an experience, the lived expression of one's daily life, there are various facets that I was able to extrapolate from it. I understand that imagination happens internally, inside of a person. So we refer to that as an intrapersonal process, an intrapersonal experience. Imagination happens between people. It happens in collaboration, with through ideation, free association. So it is an interpersonal experience. I
Yeah.
also learned from the subjects that I studied that imagination can also be seen as a transpersonal experience. It happens with oneself, and it can be within community, of course, but it also is part of the bigger ether, I would say, of one's spiritual or ecological, or be it religious, or be it just transpersonal experience. So for many who are familiar with the transpersonal, you'll know what I mean when I say that, but it's kind of looking at a bigger sense of one's cosmology in the universal energies and fields that we live in. So
Yeah.
just to sort of recap, I guess the way I would technically describe it is imagination is an experience of human consciousness that embodies those three facets to it. Um,
Yeah.
but that's a mouthful. So I kind of like where you're going, Melinda. Um, it's the
Yeah.
place. It's the place we begin. It's the sandbox you first land. It's like there is no creativity without something having lived inside of you first. What you can imagine, what you
Yeah.
fantasize over. Anyways, I'll pause. I want to hear your thoughts too. Hmm.
Yeah, no, I love that there's those three dimensions that you found because, sometimes we think about imagination as being purely an internal process, as you first mentioned, this sort of intrapersonal. And
Yes.
yet, imagination always happens in a context, right? And in creativity, we often talk about divergent thinking, associative thinking. We're making connections between things. And the more we're engaging with other people and with the world, the more I think potential there is for imagination. What would you say
100.
to that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think for listeners who are thinking about their own imagination right now and what it means to them, in
Hmm.
some ways one might land in terms of thinking the visual aspects of imagination, like, oh, you
Right.
visualize. That's one part of it. There's also
Hmm.
free association. There's ideating. There's beginning to not just see, by the way, that's only one perceptual skill. There's also feeling, smelling,
Yes.
sensing through other kinds of forces, the imaginative feelings or the imaginative experience. I have to go back to that word because it's highly
Hmm.
integrative. And so I wanted to sort of fuse that in. I wonder if, maybe we can tailspin off what you just said, but just to kind of provide a little bit of that context as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you say that. I remember a conversation I had with a neighbor of mine some years back, and we were just kind of sitting out in the yard with a few people and, chatting about creativity. I think I was still in the program at the time. And, he was asking me about my studies. And, in the context of the conversation, it came up where he was like, well, I don't actually see images in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I
Exactly.
hear, I experience in other ways, but
Yes.
we so often associate imagination with the visual. And
Yes.
so I think it's so important, as you pointed out, it's not just visual. Some people don't even have that capacity, and yet they still are creative and they still utilize imagination.
Well, this is something that I learned from a number of the participants, especially the musicians or composers that
Hmm.
I had talked to, is many of
Hmm.
them heard the music before they actually were able to achieve anything really about it. They heard something
Yes.
almost in the ether. some performing
Hmm.
artists could like feel something in their body, like even those who were creating characters, like a moment or an image of something that was meaningful, or a piece of costume, right? Like a
Yeah.
costume item, that
Yeah.
was like, oh my gosh, this is the character that, or something about this is the character that I intend to build.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So there's so many avenues of exploration we could go to, but one of the things we were talking about in our conversations kind of leading up to this, we think of imagination, and often creativity itself is like, oh, it's a good thing, it's a positive thing, but sometimes we also talk about the dark sides of creativity
Yes.
or of imagination. And I'm just wondering, with the people that you work with, you work with a lot of people in the entertainment industry, and you mentioned, there is this possibility of kind of, the dark side where maybe we fall into excess or even self-destruction. So,
Yes.
how does that come up in reference to imagination?
This was not part of my study, so I'll clarify to others. This is actually a facet, though, that I've just been interested in, I think, in my creativity work, is the darker aspects of
Yeah, yeah,
creativity. And guess what? The darker
yeah.
aspects of the imagination. So the way that I see it often being played out, I think, in people's lives comes with, uh, let's take a creative artist, for example. If an individual is sort of concerned that maybe they are, tapping into the darker sides of creativity, well, it's hard to generally know if that's happening. But I think that
Hmm.
often the image that someone has in their mind about what they're doing or what they're striving for or what they're trying to create may be completely and totally unfeasible. It may be completely and totally outside of their realm. That same thing
Mm.
that they're shooting for, that they see and feel deep within them, is so unattainable, but it is also creating so much conflict in their life. It's destroying interpersonal relationships. It's creating conflict in their life, maybe personally or professionally. And it's creating maybe other types of excess. Now they're returning back to alcohol. Now
Mm.
have this ongoing thing with marijuana, because we know when they're high on marijuana, they get all the images, but they're unable to do the follow through. So it's a very interesting, I think, multi-layered dynamic there. But there is a darkness there, and the darkness is probably associated exactly what you say, to self-destruction, excess, over. I want to say infantilizing, but that's not the word I'm looking for. Fantasization or fantasism, or what's the word?
Mhm.
Fantasizing, overly fantasizing without doing the directed work towards their goal and seeing the feasibility of it all at the end of the day.
Yeah, great. So, what would be the antidote to that? So, if you see like clients or, people that you work with kind of falling into some of those pitfalls, how could they work with that? How could they find their way out?
This is an extremely complex area that I think requires one to work with a coach such as yourself, Melinda, because you do extraordinary work with creative professionals and you're highly attuned. Or, say, a psychologist with a background in creativity, or certainly just a very open and understanding psychologist who understands, yeah,
Mhm.
you can get dark inside of yourself. Like, somebody who has a Jungian background too might be able to identify this quickly. But it's extremely multidimensional, and I think it's important for someone to come to the person that they're asking for support with, to be like, I don't know if I'm engaging in a darkness about myself, in terms of my creativity, that is not going to be worth. It's not worth my time. It's actually not helping me grow. I'm not getting where I want to. And I need someone to help me understand this, or help guide, Sherpa, midwife, the experience. Um,
Yes.
it's hard
Mhm.
to say generally, because there's a lot of different aspects to it. But I think that if you are feeling stuck, for any artist who may be feeling stuck, I would also wonder if there is a darker aspect to your imaginative or creative world that may be holding you back. And by the way, some of those problems
Yeah.
might also be spiritual in nature. falling off of spiritual
Yeah.
practice and not seeing it in connection with the imaginative creative process that you're in. You had something to say about that, Melinda. I could tell. Were you going to
Yeah,
add?
yeah, no, well, so you mentioned kind of the Jungian side, which is something I've delved into as well, and I find very fascinating as it relates to creativity. And so, I've been kind of presenting and writing about, what happens when we get stuck creatively, and it helps to understand sometimes getting stuck is actually just a natural part of the creative process. And so if we can
There you go.
understand creativity as this journey, like along the lines of the hero's journey, where it's like we kind of have to go down into that abyss in order to
Yes.
find our way back out and come
Yes.
full circle, then if we can kind of anticipate that that's something that happens along the way, then we don't have to be so afraid of it. And we might be able to
Yes.
actually open up to it, right? So Jung said, there's no way out but through. So sometimes when we're in, more of a dark or shadowy place, there's actually something really vital to explore there. And to me, it also relates to the incubation phase of creativity, which is where we might be really focused on a project. Sometimes we do have to step away and let
Yep.
our mind kind of percolate in the background and keep working on it. And then we can kind of come back fresh, or we'll get an insight. When we're doing something
Yes.
completely different, like we're in the shower, we're taking a walk, we're in our dreams, and something will come, right?
Yes.
So
Well,
just being
oof. Mhm.
open to the journey. It's not a linear one, right?
No, it's not. And, I know now we're kind of going into the shadow Jungian, and which is representative of some type of darkness within the imaginative or creative world. I want to say that, as an example for those who are thinking about their own lives and, or,
Yes.
people they know, is that often we can give our creative power away to others for validation
Mm,
so that we can get, be connected to the Hollywood industry, so that we can get our agents to like us more, to work for us harder for this. We give our power away as opposed to taking all
yeah.
of those sort of chips back and be like realizing, what, maybe this thing that you're writing or maybe this thing that you're creating, yeah, maybe it'll sell millions. Maybe at the end of the day it will, but maybe it's also, if you let go of the attachments of those realms, if you were to just see it for yourself, that perhaps it's a portal into the unknown, the world of insights, understanding yourself better, then maybe it was all just sort of worth that healing process. And what if that was just okay? If it was just for you, and at the end of the day, it was all for you, but it also like turned you into a better person, made you think of a new business idea, you became a better partner to somebody. So I wanted to just put that into the mix. Or, when you think darkness, it's like, no, like you say, it can be now the doorway into the whole other realms of insight and knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. So, this seems to be a theme that's coming up a lot in this show and this podcast is, there's creativity kind of for, a specific end, a specific product, but there's also a value in creativity just unto itself as a process, as a way of expressing ourselves, as a way of working through things that can be very therapeutic and healing in its own right, as you're saying.
That's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Mhm.
So you touched on the kind of spiritual aspects of the creative process, and I want to go into that because I think it's a topic that we both really are interested in. And so I'm curious how you see the connection between imagination and intuition. You've talked about synchronicity and spirituality. So I know this is a big question, but
Mm.
how do these things fit together in your world and in your own experience?
It's like a part of me wants to like go back to my dissertation and cite, some of the great literature and cite, but a part of me is like, you
Right.
know what? Let it all go. Whatever is needed has already been sunk deep sort of into me. I know
Definitely.
for my own personal life and my creative life, and then the work I've done with clients, that there would be no imagination without intuition, without synchronicity. There would be no synchronicity without imagination, without intuition. There'd be no intuition without. It's like this wondrous, circular, spiraled world of experiences. In fact, sometimes an intuitive hit leads someone to have more imaginative experiences related to artwork they want to create, or vice versa. There can be
Mm-hmm.
like a synchronicity of events that happen in the world that makes one like almost as if the information is now walking to them. They like are confronted with something that is now meaningful for them personally or creatively, or however the chips may fall in life. So, not that I'm providing any possible definitions for anybody about this. I don't think that's what it's about. I would like to say to people that will listen to this is just validate that the
Mm-hmm.
three are working hand in hand. You have to have all three of those aspects working hand in hand in their own cosmology if you want to take things to the next level and begin to actually create something. Because remember, as Melinda said, it's like the second or third or heck fifth step in the process. Like having those
Mm-hmm.
three in alignment initially is part of those steps. It's a rite of passage, as you step into your
Yeah.
creativity. So I did a little bit of tailspin here with what I think your initial question, but there's a co-relationship between the spiraled worlds.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like I feel everything's interconnected, right? And so when we talk about, just for a little bit of definition, just what I'm thinking about in my mind, when we talk about intuition, it's like tuning in to the deep self, right? Sometimes it involves getting out of the head and getting more into the heart, or getting more into the body and just paying attention to what's coming up there. And then synchronicity kind of has to do with like paying attention to what's happening in the world. And, when we do that, when we're working on a particular project or we're just thinking about a certain thing, we start to see that everywhere. It's like the classic, we're thinking about buying a car and all of a sudden we see that car everywhere. Right? It's like we're thinking about a certain idea and then all of a sudden, everything that we encounter, is kind of affirming that in a way.
Yeah, it's now everywhere. It's like magical dust, like fairy
Yeah.
dust. It's everywhere. I love that you bring up the
Yeah.
definition part. I think it's, as psychologists, there is a real need to define any terms that we use. And I've realized that often with clients, without defining anything, people just somehow know what it is. Like
Yes.
intuitively, they
Yes.
know what intuition is. But by the
Exactly.
way, sometimes people don't intuitively know what imagination is. So this is something to consider.
Right. Right. Yes. So I'm curious, we're both coaches around creativity. We both work with people in a psychological context. And I'm curious, what advice would you give to people who are struggling with either their creative process or just their sense of creative purpose? Like, do you have any sort of go-to strategies there?
Well, what's first coming up for me is that there are so many human problems that prevent people from fully committing to their passion and purpose that is expressed
Yeah.
initially in their imagination and then gets manifest into creativity. The amount of problems, the amount of blocks that people have, what I have found are like limitless. But so too is
Mm.
imagination. It is also limitless. So I think in many ways, I want to be clear with that people in their own self-reflective work, it's okay to ask oneself, what is exactly the block that is upon them?
Yeah.
What is exactly the problem in which they are dealing with? And it is exactly that problem or issue, however they decide to see it, to actually, I want to say, love it. I want to say not like fall in
Mm.
love with it, but offer it love, offer it attention, give it support, give that part of you that is holding the problem or holding the block that's deep within you, give it some love and bring it to the light. Get support, get help. That could be with a coach, or it could be with this, working with a psychotherapist, or it could be entering into a really supportive artist group, finding an ally friend to help you in that process. So this to me is really quite critical. Now, when it comes to certain problems, I probably have more to say about it. Here's one problem I will share, and because I've often heard this, is lack of confidence. Some people might not even utter those words. They might sound insecure.
Yes.
Yes, you lack confidence, right? Confidence is a muscle. You have to build confidence like a muscle. And how do you build muscle? You have to start working it one day at a time. And it doesn't have to be much, but you have to give love to that part of you expressed in your creativity every single day, some time and attention. Okay. And now in this case, I'm talking specifically about confidence, not just finding it in people that can help you, but no, you now helping yourself. So I can actually talk
Yes.
more about confidence, but I'll pause there because maybe you might want to add more, or there might be a question on top of this. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much around this. This has been coming up again in other conversations I've been having, for this show, and certainly in clients that I work with. People can tend to be so self-critical,
Yes.
right? And so self-judgmental, and to
Yes.
where, like, sometimes I'll recommend to a client, like, well, try just doing a gratitude practice, or just thinking about, like, what went well. And it's hard to even do that. So I think you're right. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist teacher, talks about making friends with ourselves, right? And there's this whole movement
Mm-hmm.
around self-compassion. And
Yes.
yeah, so much of it is, how do we kind of be kind to ourselves in order to develop that true confidence, which is not the same thing as arrogance by any means, right? But just that
No, it's not.
sense of our own ability and efficacy in the world or in our creative work.
I think at the core of confidence is self-love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, self-love and a respect for one's imaginative and creative sensibility. I'm speaking specifically about
Yes.
artists when I say that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Definitely. Well, this is wonderful. I'm curious. I have an eye on the
Mm,
time, but I feel like
of course.
there's maybe something more to say here. And I'm curious, like, what's at the top of your mind at the moment
Mm.
around creativity, creative process, whether it, just in your own work or things that come up with your clients?
It's interesting spending so much time investigating imagination and creativity. I have really had to almost let go of the topic in some ways because it
Mm,
had infiltrated every single aspect of myself. And so
yeah.
I just allow myself to just sort of begin to have interest in other places. These days I've been really
Yeah.
interested in nutrition and fitness, and how that sort of it affects people's ability to function and age. And anyways, that's been a kind of a new thing, but outside of creativity. But I think with that said, I'm constantly a student of the greater ether that we live in. And by
Mm,
that, I think
yes.
I refer to something much greater, something far higher in spiritual depth and dimension. So when I refer to the ether, you can almost think of it as like a worldwide ethernet of different,
Hmm.
energetic fields and energetic dimensions that I believe that we live in. And I believe that imagination and creativity live in those places. And it's a matter of getting connected to those internal, external coordinates to feel a sense of deep connection with the self. I believe that, and another interest of mine is always the ways that we are channels. Artists are
Yeah.
channels. Humans are just we are just channels of information. And I think at times we've barely come to understand the extent of our own ability to channel within the fields
Yeah.
that we live in. So, this isn't necessarily research related. It's just me as a person sitting with my own creativity and my own psychology and working with people, the kinds of things I'm fascinated over, as well as the moon and a bunch of other things.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's so much, again, going on like in the world around us and in the wider cosmos,
yeah,
right? And we're usually only
100%.
conscious aware of a tiny fraction of that. But by tuning in with practices like meditation, it
There you go.
allows us to connect
Yeah,
with ourselves, our own motivations, our own musings and creative ideas, but it also allows us to
yes,
connect with the wider world, the wider cosmos, if you will. And then, there's a receptivity
yeah.
that happens that can inform our ideas and our work.
1000%, I believe. Not that every artist needs to have a spiritual life or any religious life per se, but it's about connectivity in general and being plugged into
Exactly.
an energetic source, whatever that might be. That intrigues
Right.
me to no end.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm always kind of encouraging people, whatever that looks like for you, right? There's no one way to go about it. There's no one way to connect, but really understanding your own creative process and what works for you and kind of what lights you up and what seems to be a productive avenue, and then being able to have some awareness around that so that you can continue to cultivate it and support it
Yes,
for
and I
yourself.
that's right, Melissa. And I wanted to add one thing. It just was coming up for some reason while you were talking and saying such things, and
Yeah.
also in reference to what I had just shared about my, I guess, interest areas right now. But when it comes to the body, um, any creative professional cannot underestimate the power of one's own body to bring
Yes.
about one's creativity. If one is not healthy, if they are living with, uh, certain, let's say, symptomology from certain illnesses or whatnot, it will impact your creativity. Not necessarily for the worse, but I'm saying it will impact your creativity. And so, with that said, I'm hoping that all artists that are listening to this can also consider their body in connection with the things that they're trying to manifest right now. And if they feel, where do they feel on the scale of strength and weakness? Where do they feel,
Hmm.
or where do they sense in what's going on with their body that the creative process is actually helping to heal them or not heal them? There's a big conversation there. And if it intrigues you, I think that is actually a great thing to talk about with somebody that you're working with more intimately.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much wisdom in the body. There's so much knowledge. We talk about our brain, our second brain and our gut, so much there to explore through different modalities, movement practices, somatic work. Yeah, I think essential to
Yes.
creativity.
Body is like an open library. It's an eco center of like all
Yes,
the knowledges of ever. It's all within us.
exactly. Well, I know we could talk all day,
Yeah.
and I really
Yes.
appreciate your taking the time today. So many places we could go here, but I want to honor your time and that of my crew here who's recording us. So just want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you. And if people want to find more about what you're up to and your work, how can they find you?
Yes, you can go to my website, empowermentpsychologyla.com. It's
Awesome.
empowermentpsychologyla.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Diana.